Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter, and we have another episode of Ask a Crafter today. I am, if I seem a little wilted, it is like 8 o'clock at night, and I wanted to answer all the questions that were recently posted because I thought it would be fun, and I'm taking a little break after this batch of Ask a Crafter, so I wanted to make sure I answered all the questions that were at least one time. Sometimes we get duplicates, but yeah, I wanted to make sure I got to them all. So this first one comes from Fairy Dust. Do you have any suggestions for using oil pastels in a mixed media context? For example, oil pastels is the main medium and something else for accents, details, or just ways to add them to a project. I've been thinking about a watercolor background with an oil pastel foreground centerpiece would be interesting, but I struggled to think of more interesting ways to use them. I did just do a bunny in oil pastel with a watercolor background. Oil pastel is great over watercolor. As far as what you can add over oil pastel, you can use colored pencil. You may end up actually scraping some of the pastel away, and then it will deposit a little color. That looks kind of cool. Since oil pastel is a very thick, fat medium, it kind of has to go on top of other things, but it also is a little bit more difficult to control, so it is nice that you can take your colored pencils and go in and kind of refine areas. But I found colored pencils and oil pastels work really well together, and then of course you can do oil pastels over most other mediums, so as long as you use it last, you should be good. Susan Milligan asks, I'm new to pan pastels and really love them. I just don't know how to seal them. I want to use them on cards and art without having to frame my art under glass. Any suggestions? Yeah, use some fixative spray. That should work just fine. Another thing you could use is take Mod Podge, and if you bray your Mod Podge on a jelly plate, you can press the pan pastel work down and lift it up, and it will leave a thin coating of your Mod Podge on top, and it will be nice and sealed. Of course, you want to do that to that page that you've pan pastel before you add it to your card. Otherwise, you really wouldn't be able to seal a card on the with any dimension on the gel plate. Ginger Snaps asks, on a scale of 1 to ruh-roh, how bad is it not to clean your clear stamps? Perhaps, especially since that laziness is justified by only using Black Ranger ink, so it can't cross-contaminate anywhere. I would say if it's outline stamps, like a line art, like a simple kind of cartoon style line art, you should be fine. If it's something really intricately detailed, over time that ink is going to build up in the nooks and crannies, and it could give you problems getting a nice crisp image. But as long as you don't have any super detailed images, you're probably fine. Gloria asks, how often do you change your rinse water when watercoloring? Usually at the end of the day, because I always use one bucket. I have 2 buckets of water. I use one for cleaning my brush and the other one for getting fresh water out for a wash. So I'm always dipping my brush or rinsing my brush in the dirty water first and then going to the clear. So usually 2 jars of water last me all day. If I only had 1 cup of water, I would have to change it very frequently. So that's a trick. 2, some people do even do 3. Some other watercolor artists, and I've even seen divided water buckets that have 3 columns for water. So you have your dirty water, then you got your medium, then you got your fresh. So 2 or 3 buckets, you shouldn't have to change it. Diane asks, on the warm and cool primary triads, how to tell which set is which? I think you basically have a 3-way tie in your questions. Well, I'd asked people to do like long videos, short videos, rapid fire. It was funny. It was like a even 3-way split. Don't think of it as warm and cool as much as think of how the color leans. So instead of thinking that ultramarine is a warm blue and phthalo blue is a cool blue, think ultramarine leans towards purple, or phthalo blue leans towards blue, and lemon yellow leans towards green, and gamboge leans towards orange, and cadmium red leans towards orange, and crimson leans towards purple. So if you remember which way the color leans, it's going to be easier for you to mix and get vibrant colors, because you just go by what looks the closest to the color I'm going for. Jessica R asks, what's the difference between acrylic gouache and acrylic gouache? She says, what's the difference between acrylic gouache and acrylic gouache? I think she means acrylic gouache and regular gouache. Regular gouache is rewettable once it's dry, and acrylic gouache is not. Acrylic gouache is simply a matte acrylic paint. And which would I recommend? It depends on whether you want to be able to reactivate it. I prefer regular gouache, but it totally depends on the project. Snow Dragon KA asks, how many colors is a good middle ground between having all the colors you can get and having to mix everything? What I mean is that if you were to choose the smallest set that's comfortable to use without having to mix most of the colors, what would it be? And since it differs between dry techniques and wet techniques, maybe split those two up. Well, like I mentioned in a previous Ask a Crafter, that if it's something you can mix, if it's like a paint, then you don't need as many colors. You need like I would do a warm and cool of each primary, so there's 6. I would do a sap green, yellow ochre, and burnt umber or burnt sienna. That's my personal pick for pretty much any paint medium. And then, yeah, for color pencils, alcohol markers, pastels, you'd want more because they're not going to mix as much as they would with paint. So if it was like pastels, I would say I would try to get like a set of 48. If it was alcohol markers, I would try at least to get a set of 72. If it was color pencils, I mean, you can get by with like 24 if they're a nice soft pencil that mixes well, but I'd try to get a full set of 72 or higher pencils. But if it's watercolor pencils, a set of 12 is often going to just do you just fine. Water-based markers, you don't need quite as much of a set. Anything that mixes with water, usually you can go with a little bit less. Bird Lady, B1ard Lady, I'm sorry, I don't know how that's supposed to be said. With watercolor, how do you load a lot of pigment on your brush for more intense looks and coverage, darker values? I'm constantly struggling to get enough without adding more water, which in turn washes out the pigment. I'm a beginner currently using Winsor Newton Cotman pans and tubes. Okay, Canson paper and Amazon brushes. If you're using Cotman tubes and you're struggling to get a strong enough pigment, I would say use fresh paint, just especially if you want that really big wash, like you're doing backgrounds and you want that like a big wash of ultramarine blue. Take it right from the fresh tube of paint, add water to it, dilute it in the palette, make as much as you're going to need, and then start painting with it. I also find that if you're mixing up color and you're struggling to get a dark enough color, use a stiffer brush. Excuse me, I put my jammy pants on, so I am like comfy. So I want to sit crisscross applesauce in my chair. Yeah, so I would work from the tube if you can, and if you can't, like you don't have that color in a tube paint, get a stiff brush and, you know, use that with a little bit of water to really work up that paint into a nice kind of syrupy consistency. Bring it to your mixing area and add a little water to it there. Cotman should do just fine. I use Cotman quite frequently. I taught with that for a long time. It's not bad paint. It may be a little, you know, it's not as pigmented as artist grade, but you should still be able to get what you need to get. Oh, this is a hard one. Lisa MR40 asks, I was wondering if a person wanted to get started crafting general type, what 10 supplies would you recommend so they could get started? That's tough because crafting covers so many different things. Boy, since I mainly paper craft, I would say a good cardstock, because if you have a good cardstock, then in a pinch you can run it through your home inkjet printer. You could print out a sheet of pattern paper or a sheet of just plain print if you wanted to. Good quality scissors. A paper trimmer if you are going to be a paper crafter, but of course you can use scissors or an X-Acto knife and a cutting edge. General crafting, geez. If you're crafting with kids, it's nice to have things like pom-poms and sequins and glitter. 10 items. Man, 10 items? I've got more than 10 items sitting on half of my desk there. Geez, 10 items. Maybe some felt. That's pretty versatile. I think I'd probably go for my most versatile stuff, but without knowing if it's like kids crafting or paper crafting or sewing. Yeah, that's really tough. I think you'd have to specify what kind of craft you want to do and then get your basic tools first, because you're going to use those forever. Like you're going to use scissors and a paper trimmer for so many different crafts. You'll use scissors for everything, you know. That's hard without it specifying what type of craft that you want to get. I probably, if it was just a 10 thing type thing or maybe a budget, I think I would just get buy a general bucket of craft supplies that has like a bunch of different things like popsicle sticks, googly eyes, pom-poms. Those are things I typically don't use, but when I think of like general crafting, I think of more like kind of you're going to do crafting with kids or with a Sunday school group or a scout group or something like that. So I'm sorry, that probably was not a very good answer. I apologize. Anna Descartes asks, what do you do with all your finished pieces? Cards, I'll use some of my cards. Others go right into a shop downtown in Bangor called Accents. The lady that owns it sells it, and it's on consignment, so that's a great way to get rid of some of those. Paintings, I'm working in sketchbooks a lot now because I'm out of space to store paintings. I rarely bother with framing them. After I'm done a painting, I'm rarely even thinking about it again. Sometimes I sell them. I've got a bunch of stuff matted and ready to go for the next time I can do a art fair or craft fair. And then I also have a stack of stuff that is good enough to frame. And then when I get a bunch of ones that are meh, but I might want to return to them for a technique or for an example or something. Those go into like just big portfolios in the other end of the basement. The stuff that I think is good and saleable, I actually keep in an armoire in my office where it's a little more temperature controlled. But yeah, I don't have great plans for my artwork. Some of my kids hang it up in their rooms if they like a painting. I guess some hung up, but not a lot. So yeah, I've been working on sketchbooks a lot because I could produce way more than I have practical things to do with them. And we'll do one more for this question. Oh, this is a good one too. Vicky Rivera asks, how does one who is art inclined produce on command? I turned down a job offer to Hallmark when I was in college because I know that I have periods of low desire. I mean, doesn't the mood have to hit sometimes? I have many interests in the art realm, but only so many free hours, and I'd like to do it as my job. But I think heretofore, but I think I could keep a schedule. So basically she's saying like, how do you, it was a pretty long comment, how do you create art on command? Well, if you're working for a company like Hallmark or any other commercial art entity, they're going to tell you what they need. So you have a framework in which to work, and then you just buckle down and do it. The muse does not just hit. You don't have to feel inspired to work. If I had to wait until I was inspired to do anything, I wouldn't get a quarter of the stuff done that I do. You have to set a schedule and make yourself work, just like you're doing anything else. You wouldn't show up at your job at a store and say, I'm not inspired to stock those shelves. You wouldn't have a job very long. And it's the same thing with art. If you're doing it as work, it is a job, and you have to show up from 9 to 5 or from, 9 to 11:30 p.m. or whatever it is, and you need to do your work, just like with anything else. It's probably a little bit easier when you work for a company who's giving you assignments, because then you are told what to do, so you can be creative within those perimeters, but you know what you're doing, instead of being completely self-directed where you might go off track or you might procrastinate, because you have all day, you have no tight deadlines. But yeah, I mean, it's a job, just like anything else. Art is work if you do it for a living, and you've got to buckle down and just do it. If you wait till you're inspired, it's going to be a real hard road for you, I think. And that wraps up for this week's Ask a Crafter. Thank you so much for watching, and if you submitted questions, thank you for that too. I'm still filming from this batch of questions, and so if your question was asked and didn't get answered yet, then tune in next week for another exciting Ask a Crafter. See you next time. Happy crafting.